It's my pleasure and honor to introduce you to the MITRE Corporation's Early Career Research Program. For the past 3 years, MITRE has invested $1 million each year to develop science, technology, engineering, and mathematics leadership. Created within MITRE's innovation program, the Early Career Research Program helps develop critical leadership skills, including how to perform research, how to manage a research project, and how to communicate results effectively. The Early Career Research Program is highly selective, and each participant pursues a particular research challenge under the careful guidance of an experienced research mentor, often simultaneously pursuing an advanced degree. Many participants work half-time on the direct program, accelerating transition of their research to MITRE sponsors. Now in its third year, the program has contributed to the development of 20 extraordinary individuals. Prior participants have had their work externally recognized, for example, as best papers at conferences, and even acquiring direct funding from the government. So, please lean forward and enjoy meeting one of MITRE's early career researchers.
My name is Nadya Subowo. I'm a senior communications engineer in CASD. Today I'm presenting my work on Agile systems engineering for the National Airspace System. But before I get started, I do want to give some thanks to several folks, Valley Garon, Craig Wenke, Glenn Roberts, and my IL, Marie Francesca, who's up in Bedford, for all their invaluable help throughout this entire year. So the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, is looking to transform their legacy air traffic control systems. This modernizational effort is called Next Generation Air Transportation System, or NextGen for short, and really hopes to kind of bring 3 different benefits in mind, where you're increasing efficiency, you're finding ways to ensure that there's safety in the national airspace, and you're also trying to preserve the nation's economy, essentially. It began as a mandate in 2003 and hopes to deliver all of these benefits by the 2025 timeframe. And this image here represents a portion of what NextGen is. There's a bunch of different systems. There are lots of different capabilities that are going to be delivered. For example, we're talking about performance-based services or trajectory-based operations, which means that we're trying to fly more fuel-efficient routes in the sky. Instead of flying in a zigzag pattern from LA to Washington, D.C., you're flying a more direct route. We're also talking about global harmonization, where you're trying to standardize communications between aircraft or even between pilots and controllers on the ground so that the standards are going to be the same whether you're in the US or even in Europe, for example. Now, with any large federal acquisition program, the FAA is also under significant amount of scrutiny in order to deliver all of these next-gen capabilities by the 2025 timeframe. So it's been roughly 10 years since the original mandate, and Congress is wondering where taxpayer dollars are going. You can kind of see from some of these examples from the GAO and IG reports that there's significant concern in the FAA's ability. They cite that there's a high level of complexity for a lot of these air traffic control systems and interdependencies and parallel development efforts. They also cite the fact that there isn't a clear, well-communicated implementation plan to the aviation community, where airlines need to align their business cases for when certain next-gen capabilities are going to be delivered. Most recently, the aviation subcommittee that's chaired by Mr. Lobiondo here wanted to inquire into the next-gen implementation delays. And he says in his opening statement, "I've heard that some transformational next-gen programs aren't truly transformational and that the FAA will never be able to make the tough decisions required to advance next-gen, and that no one can really agree on what next-gen is today or what it should be in 2025. Now, to really understand the problem space and really understand the high-level complexity in regards to trying to define and create these next-gen capabilities, I wanted to present the stakeholder and kind of your influencing factors in a POET framework, looking at your political, your operational, your economic, and technical factors here. Politically, you have your union groups, including your air traffic controller unions and your system safety specialists, who really define your systems acceptance criteria for a lot of these next-gen capabilities. Operationally, you have certain processes, like your acquisition process, your system engineering process that the FAA has defined and that each program has to undergo. Economically, you also have your FAA appropriations budget that's determined by Congress each fiscal year. And technically, you also have certain standards, what I alluded to for global harmonization. You have committees like RTCA and ICAO and even the FAA that define specific technical standards that need to be rolled in and incorporated into the overall system architecture as a whole. Now, taking a step back and looking at how the FAA conducts their systems engineering methodologies, it's a very sequential process, essentially. And it takes, on average, about 7.5 years to go from design to development. But there's significant risk by following that because you're not able to be more reactive to certain operational changes or changes in your technical baseline, meaning that you're not able to account for tomorrow's demands, essentially. And that's where Agile can really fit in. Agile here really speaks to the ability to efficiently and effectively respond to changes in the operational environment, whether they be changes in the operational need or even technical things becoming obsolete, for example. And it builds on the idea of being timely, affordable, and usable to the community at large. It began as, had its origins in software development as a way to kind of have this parallel development approach where you're including integration and testing continuously throughout the entire process. And it was captured in the Agile Manifesto in 2001. So it is a relatively somewhat new-ish field that's really been starting to grow. And there's lots of different processes that have been identified, including Scrum and the Scaled Agile framework shown at the bottom here, that actually have been successfully adopted in other federal agencies, including the DoD, the NGA, and the VA, for example, and where they have been able to show positive impact for moving towards your sequential development model to a more agile approach. So the research and the problem space I wanted to look at this year was whether or not Agile would be an appropriate response to a lot of these IG and the GAO reports, and whether Agile can be actually adopted into the current methodology as a way to allow the FAA to deliver next-gen capabilities to the aviation community. So the first framework that I developed as part of my research is called the Agile Systems Engineering Framework. And it takes the best practices that have been identified in both the public and the private sector and incorporates it into how the FAA actually conducts their systems engineering methodologies. The goal for this framework is to really find a way to efficiently and effectively acquire capabilities. It moves away from the traditional sense of systems engineering where you're trying to define the optimal solution and really focuses your priorities on what the user needs are and allowing the design to evolve throughout time. It has this idea of having continuous stakeholder engagement throughout the entire process, instead of moving away from the whole stovepipe design process, essentially. And it's built on the idea of having incremental releases where you're continuously delivering value to your end user at the end of the day. So you can see that there are 4 different blocks that have been highlighted in blue, and those represent the key activity areas, systems engineering activities that the FAA is heavily engaged in. So now I'm going to walk through an example of 2 of them and kind of highlight how Agile has been adopted in those particular stages. The first one here is an integrated technical planning, and it's traditionally used to really define the activities that's needed in order to develop a system at the end of the day. And with Agile, you're kind of taking it and again, not focusing on the optimal solution, but focusing on the operational capabilities and your high priority and high risk items first here, and trying to ensure that there is alignment with the user community at the end of the day. That's where user feedback really drives your development process. By having them continuously engage, you're ensuring that at the end of a particular release, you have a set of capabilities that has been fully tested, that is interoperable with the environment, and it is actually going to be of value to your air traffic controllers, for example, as a part of the user community here. The next one is requirements analysis. And here we're talking about your technical baseline, looking at your functional and non-functional requirements, what the system needs to be and what the system must be. And traditionally, we're talking about your system shall do X, which doesn't really provide a lot of context. But with Agile, you're able to use this idea of having user stories, which really provides a little more contextual information behind that particular requirement that allows your developers to have a little bit more design flexibility. A real good example, kind of keeping in with the security theme that's been going on today, is one for a system admin, where they would need to the system would need to be able to provide root access to them in order for them to complete their any objectives regarding to maintenance, for example. Traditionally, a lot of these requirements have to be frozen before any implementation work that's going to be done. But with Agile, change is welcome, change is appreciated, because they know that what you're going to wear today isn't going to be what you're going to wear tomorrow. So it kind of facilitates that idea by having a backlog, essentially, that captured a lot of your user stories and kind of prioritizes them in a way. So you're continuously engaging your user community, ensuring that their high-level priorities are being met. And if there's certain changes in how certain functions are being performed or what changes are in technically, those can be incorporated and addressed in a user story and then reprioritized and make sure that when you're developing that you're also hitting those high-priority items, essentially. The second framework that I've developed here is the Agile System Design Framework, and this is very orthogonal to the idea of having an Agile system process, where a lot of times systems today are built with a single purpose or a set of objectives in mind. But whenever there's a change in the operational need or change in the technical baseline, it becomes very costly and very time-consuming to go through the entire acquisition and systems engineering process again. So moving towards an Agile system design it really builds on this idea of having a loosely coupled architecture, essentially, kind of having a shared platform where you're able to move from one operating condition to the next. It builds on this idea of trying to hedge against an uncertain future, essentially. And there are 4 different tenets that this framework is built on. The first one is flexibility and reconfigurability, where you have certain components and you're able to kind of add and subtract and scale your features as appropriate depending on the operational needs. And you also have certain components you're able to reconfigure them in order to meet a new objective. The next 2 are reusability and scalability, where you also have components that have a particular behavior, a particular service that they have in mind, and you're able to use them and apply them in many different environments as a whole. So a real good example for a lot of them is moving towards a modular architecture or cloud computing, or even having a plug-and-play interface. Most notably for cloud computing, the FAA is actually moving towards cloud computing platforms. So that's another aspect, another application that needs to, that could move towards this whole Agile system design framework, where you're trying to understand what the long-term organizational objectives are and incorporate them into the overall architecture as a whole. So again, when you're trying to hedge against an uncertain future, because a lot of these air traffic control systems may be deployed for 5 or even 50 years down the road. So in terms of trying to balance design flexibility and lifecycle costs is something that a lot of programs have to consider during the whole design development process. To really understand what the impact of Agile is, I conducted a case study and looked at 2 different NextGen systems that have their own operational issues, and they're relatively young in that whole acquisition process, and wanted to see if there was going to be either a positive or negative benefit for actually moving towards a rapid development process. And here you can kind of see your POET elements again, your stakeholder consensus. And there are going to be some positive and negatives that Agile has. For the positive benefits, politically and technically, with Agile, you're able to continuously address your stakeholder needs throughout the entire design process. As I said before, you have your union groups and you have certain technical standards that need to be incorporated into the overall architectural design. Making sure that you have your specialty engineering continuously engaged throughout the entire design process ensures that their operational needs are being considered and have been captured in user stories, and that whenever there's a significant design decisions, they're able to kind of voice their concerns as appropriate. It also brings your system maintainers into the picture. A lot of times it's very stovepiped when you're doing a lot of your development process. But by bringing them on board, you're also able to understand what their operational needs are. That really builds on this idea of having a loosely coupled architecture where you're able to have this high-level abstraction and build in design flexibility and reconfigurability into your overall architecture as a whole. And most importantly, it addresses the need of having an implementation plan where the FAA clearly defines in terms of a release schedule what certain capabilities are going to be delivered and when, whether it's going to be a 6-week time frame or 6-month time frame. And it really makes sure that a lot of your political factors, including your union groups and your carriers, kind of like your United and your Deltas of the world, are able to understand how their certain capabilities are going to be delivered, and so they're able to also align their business needs with those capabilities. Unfortunately, Agile doesn't make your budget crisis go away, but it does provide a way to actually work within that context. As I said before, affordability is key. When you're focusing on your high priority, high operational need items or your high risk items, you're being very transparent with your budget and trying to ensure that you're able to perform certain activities in order to meet a certain operational need given that particular constraint here. Operationally, there are some concerns, and this is where some of the negatives come out and can be highlighted. A lot of programs for NextGen programs and systems today are very milestone driven. The acquisition process is very laborious within the FAA, and there may be some negative benefits. If you're moving towards a more rapid development cycle, but you still have a very structured acquisition process, you're not gaining some of the benefits for moving, saving time or saving costs, because you still need a certain level of artifacts and milestone deliveries to meet at a particular time. In addition, the FAA has very strict standards for how certain systems are going to be, how systems are going to undergo training. The FAA requires that controllers continuously go through training whenever there's a change in the operational baseline. Again, if you're moving towards an agile approach and you're continuously releasing new capabilities every 6 months, that also means that there's an impact on controller workload, where they have to continue to go through training for a certain period of time every 6 months, taking away time from their actual jobs. That's a balance and concern that needs to be addressed. So moving towards an agile approach was really something I wanted to look at this entire year. I started out with a problem kind of identifying that there's some slowness in terms of the acquisition process with systems engineering process, and really wanted to understand why. And I found that there are some benefits from moving towards an agile approach here, where it really builds on this idea of continuously delivering value in a rapid manner and finding ways to engage your stakeholders throughout the entire process here. Again, it builds upon affordability, and it builds upon usability, and making sure that you're delivering incremental value and items that have been fully tested, interoperable at the end of the day. But also, it's another way to kind of identify and eliminate any wasteful services or even efforts. A lot of times you have parallel efforts. There needs to be interdependencies for a lot of these next-gen systems. So trying to understand where things have been duplicated, you're also able to move towards a more common platform. Again, this whole idea of cloud computing comes up here. Also, the impact of MITRE as a whole really was able to bring MITRE to bear, essentially, and find ways, as this is a brand new area for me, and also reach out across division outside of CASD and kind of leverage the expertise that's out there, where there's a lot of different folks within MITRE who are actually actively engaged in trying to develop an agile environment for their particular sponsors. Kind of bring that knowledge in and trying to determine what Agile will look like for the FAA. And is able to also turn around a lot of this work and present at a COSI conference, and trying to expand the whole Agile systems engineering research space, essentially. So there's still a lot of operational issues and concerns that need to be addressed. Acquisition is one that I mentioned earlier, but also safety needs to be addressed. So that's one of the #1 priorities for the FAA. And for next year, I'll be part of a MOE team that plans to really look at what Agile means for the Federal Aviation Administration, what that environment entails. So this research is really just beginning, just the foundation of what trying to define and really understand the problem of space as a whole, and in hopes for eventually trying to define a framework or some sort of methodology that allows the FAA to kind of move towards a more rapid development life cycle in order to deliver all of these next-gen benefits by the 2025 timeframe. So now I'd like to open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Nadya. That was terrific. Now, I have a question. Did you find any characteristics of systems that would make Agile acquisition more attractive or not? Is there some way that you could characterize a system and say that's a good one for an Agile approach, or that one's not? Does that exist yet?
I think to an extent there's a lot of programs that are actually moving towards an Agile-like process, where they understand that there's certain operational changes that need to be accommodated, so they're trying to plan out the next release. So it is moving towards, a lot of programs are actually moving towards that concept. However, I think exploring the Agile acquisition approach is a big, that needs to be done, because that's the biggest limiting factor, really. As I said before, when you have a rapid development, system development lifecycle, it makes sense. You're also able to turn around a lot of features and products over to the end user at a quicker pace. But I feel that negates some of the benefits if you still have the same acquisition approach. So the thought is there. And I think there's a lot of folks within the FAA, based on just informal conversations with them, who are looking to find ways to actually rapidly deliver next-gen capabilities, because they know their budget situation isn't going to improve in the next couple of years or so. So finding ways to continuously deliver value is very of utmost importance to them. So looking at that space, hopefully next year would kind of add a little bit more meat to some of that work.
So I like, Nadya, the way that you presented a balanced, the good and the bad with respect to Agile, because oftentimes, we get enamored by a new system engineering or a new technical widget, and we think it's going to be the savior. I thought you nicely highlighted the kind of safety and even prosperity impacts, speed and focus on sort of critical things. I'd be interested in your comment on the security dimension. So one of the things that Agile can help with is focus on critical mission threads, which can reduce risk, sort of focusing on the most important things, getting stakeholders involved, as you pointed out. But I'm kind of curious whether or not you've come across anything in your studies that have said anything about the security. Are you, I can imagine a counterpoint on that topic, so I'm interested in your view.
I think there's definitely two schools of thoughts for that. When you're having that continuous stakeholder engagement, the thought process is actually engage your security stakeholders throughout the entire design process. And the FAA has certain FAA orders that really kind of speak towards certain security mandates that need to be incorporated into the overall design. That being said, when you're trying to address the continuing monitoring aspect of security, that's where I think having an Agile system design would actually be beneficial, because a lot of there are a lot of different components. You have certain like firewall capabilities, or you have certain monitoring capabilities that are going to be employed in every single system. So instead of trying to duplicate a lot of that effort, kind of standardize that component and allow systems to kind of grab that component and kind of work it into their particular architecture. There is a lot of work actually that's trying to really look at what Agile systems engineering security really looks like. And continuous monitoring is one of the issues that they've highlighted, because it's very difficult to understand. Even though they're giving requirements over, it's really difficult to see how that requirement was particularly implemented, and trying to see the results and making sure that you're getting a common set of data points that actually can be understood by your system admin or your network admin in those sense. So I think there's an opportunity to actually look in that field.
Yeah, I have actually two comments. I'm not sure they're questions. The first one, you quote in one slide, the highest priority of a program is to satisfy the customer. We are in the public interest. We are not here to satisfy the customer, but to do something in the public good. Suppose the customer is wrong. Could some of your method address this? What do you do with that?
I think for that is really, when you're trying to gain stakeholder consensus, is really going to be a design trade-off at that point. A lot of the times for system development, a lot of folks have your air traffic controllers as your end user in mind, forgetting the fact that you have your carriers, forgetting the fact that you have your system maintainers, those standard committees who really have a strong say in how that system needs to be developed, and your system safety specialists, essentially. So it is going to be a design trade-off. So it depends on your context of in definition of what user is at the end of the day. For me, I tried to frame it in terms of those political and the operational, economical stakeholders, technical stakeholders there, as part of the idea of this aviation community. But I think at the end of the day, there needs to be some some design trade-off between the two, where it's not, you're not really meeting the users, but you're meeting the users at large, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, my second comment is, or question, is systems engineering agile? Are the methods that you're using, are they agile, or could you factor agility into them?
I think you can factor agility into them. Actually, INCOSE recently has embraced the idea of an agile systems engineering concept, and it's incorporated into their handbook. So they are exploring the idea of incorporating agile into their certain methodologies. It's not to take away the fact that using your traditional methods isn't wrong. It's still applicable when you're looking at certain like safety cases. You still want to use a more sequential approach. So it's really identifying those situations where agile may be beneficial, and trying to determine that balance between the two. But there is a lot of research right now that's starting to look into how to apply agile, and if it's not really what type of agile engineering approach, what it really looks like, kind of borrowing from what's being done in the software world today.
Nadya, I'd like to ask that same question. What did you learn about conducting research and conducting it at MITRE in particular?
I think for me personally was time management. That was a very, very good personal skill to learn, and the power of saying no. But also, on top of that, this was a brand new field for me. Agile was not really something, I've only heard about it, but wasn't really sure what it is, and only came up with a problem at hand that there was a need to find ways to have more rapid development. So kind of what Christina said before was kind of branching out my comfort zone in CASD and really reaching across MITRE and talking to those folks who actually have experience in trying to bring Agile to their sponsors and leveraging their knowledge and identify best practices into what I've learned. So I think that experience alone has been absolutely invaluable, kind of expanding my little network here.